Hi, my name is Cameron Four, and I'm an end-user computing technical strategist at VMware. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through how to deploy and configure the latest management pack for Horizon. Now, this particular video is not necessarily meant to be a deep dive on every single aspect of the deployment, but I'm going to try to cover it as much as I can in as much detail as I can without making it way too long of a video. However, to get started, just a few housekeeping items here. I did write a detailed blog on what are the various deployment considerations around the Management Pack for Horizon. So if you haven't taken a look at this particular document, I definitely do reading through it because it does have various considerations that could impact the overall successful configuration of your deployment. So just to kind of give you a sense of what's in there, right? So there are various areas of consideration. How you've deployed the overall Horizon architecture, network topology can come into play, how many sessions you have per pod, what does your load balancer configuration look like. The Horizon connection server certificates are also important. So unlike the previous V4H solution, MP4H actually talks to the Horizon APIs, and being able to successfully communicate with those APIs has various requirements. There's other considerations around API authentication, and all of those are kind of documented in this particular blog. Now, at a very high level, I also have just a quick screenshot of the overall solution requirements, so what Horizon versions are supported. So you'll see on this particular image, you'll see things like Horizon 7.13 and beyond are supported, but we also fully support the Horizon 8X platforms, which are now, of course, labeled in the year and month format based on the version of the Horizon that's currently out. Now, in terms of VROPs, we do require at least 8.6.2, and that's just because we have a lot of built-in dashboards and UI enhancements in the base platform that we take advantage of. So very important there. And it's also critical that you know that we support both on-prem and cloud VROPs. So both solutions are available to you to run the Management Pack for Horizon, and we don't force you to be in the cloud, and we don't force you to be on-prem. You get full choice of which model you want to deploy to. And in this particular demo, I'll show you the slight nuances between the interfaces when you go to deploy the Management Pack. A couple other key aspects. The vCenter for the Horizon pod must also be monitored by VROP. So even though we are using the Horizon APIs to get Horizon data, we still need to talk to vCenter to get the desktop performance data. And in terms of UAG and connection server health monitoring, we must also talk to those VROPs as well if you want to be able to get virtual machine performance statistics coming out of those particular virtual machines. So very critical there. We also use the Telegraf agent for Horizon service monitoring. So if you want to be able to leverage that capability and those services, again, it also requires VROPs to be in place and us monitoring all of the vCenter instances that are important to monitoring your Horizon environment. Another key area that we're going to go over is the connection server certificates, and they do require valid host names. Now, this particular topic is sort of like the Wild West when it comes to how various customers have implemented certificates in their Horizon environment, but at least in terms of our best practices, we do require the connection servers to have valid certs, and the blog goes into much more detail about that, but we'll kind of highly touch on some of the gotchas in terms of the demo today. Now, the other area that will be important is, how do we authenticate against the Horizon API? And to do so, we do require the Horizon admin role tied to a service account for that authentication. So depending on the various versions of Horizons that are out there, so if you're Horizon 7.13 all the way up to 8.2, you basically need the Horizon admin full role to be in place. Because if you try to use the read-only account, the Horizon API will not allow you to authenticate to that. If you are Horizon 8.3 and above or newer, then you can use the Horizon admin read-only account. So both are there, both roles can be used, but only the full role works with the earlier versions of Horizon, because again, it's a Horizon admin requirement for the APIs to access that. Also, another key aspect is you'll see in the demonstration when we go to configure the Horizon connection server, we need to actually point to a connection server and not to a load balancer. And I'll try to cover in more detail why that's so important. All right, so with that, let's get started. So again, in addition to just how do you configure it, what are your various considerations, I also did provide a download link to our marketplace VMware website. This is where you go to download the management pack. So if you've never been to our marketplace website, you will need to create an account to sign in, and that's kind of noted here. So you will sign in, make sure you're downloading the latest version, which is currently 2.1.1. I'm sure by the time some of you listen to this particular demo, we'll probably have already released a newer version. So I can quickly tell you that today is October 5th, 2022. In the next few weeks, we're going to be releasing version 2.2. It's going to contain some additional fixes and additional enhancements to the data that we're pulling in. And then very shortly after that, expected in the November timeframe, we'll hopefully have the version 2.5, which will include a lot of new features that I'm not going to discuss here. But again, just keep a look out for those particular new versions coming out soon. All right, so once you've downloaded the management pack, this is basically where you need to go when you're running an on-prem deployment. So this particular VROPS instance is configured as if it's on-prem. This is not VROPS Cloud. And when you have an on-prem deployment, it requires you to manually download the management pack, which you're going to do from here. And then you're going to go to Data Sources, Integrations, Repository, to install the management pack here with the add button. Now in this environment, you can see that it's already installed. However, I can still simulate and show you what the overall process of installing the management pack is. So if I click add, this is where I will go to select the PAK file, which is the actual management pack deployment file. And I'm already in the right folder. I can see I have the Horizon Adapter PAK file. I can see the current version and the build number. This is basically what you will be deploying in your on-prem VROPS deployment. So I will click open. I will click install the pack even if it's already installed. Now, if you've never had it installed, you won't need to click this option. But if you are doing like an upgrade, or you think you had a previous version already installed, or you had an install fail, go ahead and click this option. Also, make sure you click the reset default content. This is very important, particularly when you're doing an upgrade. So for example, if you started with Horizon Adapter 2.0 and now you're upgrading to 2.1.1, if you don't check this option, you will not get the updated dashboards and updated views that we have included in that particular release. So very important to make sure you reset the default content. Now this is where you'll click upload. And this particular part of the installation can take some time, so I'm not going to sit through and watch the whole thing. Usually the time dependency here is how large is your deployment, how many cloud proxies are in your environment that we have to install the pack to. All of this will kind of affect the timing. Expect this to last around 10 to 15 minutes depending on the overall size of your deployment, but this is all normal. So expect this, again, as I said, to take some time. So once this is fully configured and deployed, you'll just kind of click next and you'll be done. But again, I'm just going to quickly fast forward to the next phase of the installation. So I'm going to cancel this. And once you have the management pack deployed, you'll see you'll have the option to do an add account. Now that will also be available here as well, so you can also see it listed here. The Horizon Adapter will be listed there, and of course you can do add account from here as well. So both paths will get you here. So when you're doing an add account, you simply click, hey, I'm going to deploy a new Horizon Adapter account, and this is where we're going to start configuring our pod level information. So I'm going to pause here because again, this is the on-prem deployment. The cloud deployment looks very similar, but you get a couple enhancements. So in terms of where you go to acquire the management pack, instead of having to download it from the marketplace, you simply go to Data Sources, Integrations, Repository, and you will see that the management pack option for Horizon is already configured and waiting there for you. So a couple things about this environment. Again, this is our cloud-hosted VROps deployment. This is available in our VMware test drive demo site, so you can get access to this very same instance that I'm using for the demo today. If you want to get in and play around with the management pack and the data that we're already collecting, feel free to do so. But just a couple points here, right? So just like in the on-prem version, you will have the add account option, but again, it will already be here. So you don't have to worry about having to go download it to install it. It's already available for you to deploy from this particular portal. Now in here, since again, we are running cloud hosted, you'll notice that because my upgrade is available, I can simply just do an upgrade directly from here. I don't have to worry about downloading the new version of the file. It's already upgraded for me. All I have to do is click the button and it will run through the install process. But very similar, this is again is where you will want to click the reset default content option so that the new content that we deliver with each release gets provided to you in your portal. So just wanted to point that out. So I'm going to cancel this installation. And just like with the on-prem deployment, we can click add account. Now again, I can do it from either screen. I can do it directly from the integration screen or the repository screen. But again, this is where we're going to start the overall installation and configuration of the Horizon adapter. So the first piece is when you provide a name to your pod, you should really give it something meaningful that helps you to define that this is a particular pod and you know its name. Now in this case, I'm just going to say Horizon Test Pod 1. And again, this is just any name, but it should relate to your particular environment. And another note is that you only require a single Horizon adapter per pod. And this is very critical. Do not deploy multiple Horizon adapters to the exact same pod. We do not need the adapter or a single adapter to be pointed to individual connection servers, all asking the APIs the exact same information. What we do instead is we have you provide a single connection server, and we actually do mean connection server. Again, no load balancer here. So when I click on this, it says, provide me the host name of the connection server. We want a connection server, no load balancers. And in terms of availability, we use the enable collection load balancing across connection servers option to do our own load balancing. So what this means is the adapter is installed and you set this option to true, we will connect to the primary or initial connection server with the appropriate Horizon admin API credentials. We'll then query the service, and once we start discovering all the information available to us in the APIs, which is incredibly rich and detailed, we will discover the rest of the servers. So we'll already know which servers to talk to. So don't worry about trying to load balance the adapter. We do the load balancing for you, and we handle availability and failover. So that's built in to the adapter itself. So for this particular step, I'm going to provide one of the connection servers. And again, I'm just picking this one because I know it doesn't have an existing adapter connected to it. The next piece, of course, as I mentioned, you have to provide a credential. So the purpose of the credential is to authenticate against the Horizon admin API. And in this environment, we're running, I don't remember the exact version, not important, but it's at least 2111. And the purpose of this credential, again, the role that it needs to be at least a Horizon admin read-only because we're above 8.3. So 8.3 and above, I can use the read-only account. But prior to 8.3, you need to use the full admin account. And it has to be that role. Don't create a custom role and check boxes. Use one of those two accounts to authenticate. So in this case, you're just providing a credential name, and you can just call it, I'll call it Horizon API admin. And in this case, I'll give it my credentials just to have something in there, and I'll provide it a password. But basically, this account that I'm providing has to have the Horizon admin role to do the authentication in the Horizon admin portal. And I mistyped the format, so don't do it this way, do it this way. So just the username, domain is actually specified down here, and I always miss that a couple times. So you'll just click OK. And then this again should be the overall account that you use. Now, my account doesn't actually have that role, so I can't really use it. So I'm going to switch it back to this one because that particular account actually has the correct role. The next piece is the collector group that you're going to assign it to. So the way the architecture works in VROPS is that usually you're going to have your main VROPS cluster, but you're also going to have what they call cloud proxies, which is basically just a proxy. It doesn't matter if they call it cloud proxy, it doesn't mean it has to be in the cloud. But effectively what you're doing is you need that proxy to be able to communicate with the Horizon connection server, right? So one piece is the connection server can talk to the proxy, and then the proxy can push it to the VROPS cluster. And why that becomes critical is, depending on your overall Horizon deployment, you may have pods in different data centers, you may be using cloud pod architecture. So you're going to need proxies in those remote networks to be able to push the data to your centralized VROPS instance. So if you have 4 pods in 4 different data centers, you have the ability to have a proxy in every single data center, and they're all feeding into the exact same VROPS cluster. So make sure you pick the proxy that's in the correct data center. Now, in this environment, we have multiple proxies available to us. I'm basically going to pick one of these available proxies because I know it can communicate. It's on the same network as our connection server pod, and that's what I'm going to be using. So in this case, I'll just click Validate Connection, and the first thing that you'll notice is that you'll see something about an untrusted certificate found. So this is critical, right? So as I mentioned, certificates in Horizon, there's all kinds of configurations out there in terms of how customers have deployed it. But in terms of what we require, we do have to have a valid cert. So that means that the certificate that's running on your connection server cannot have a pure VIP cert of a load balancer that only has the load balancer's external FQDN in it. And the reason why this is important is, well, if I'm VROPS and I'm trying to talk to a server, I need to know that our communication is secure. And when I discover that your connection server name is vcm-2vmtd.com, I can't have a different name being presented back in the certificate. That's going to fail. It's going to say you got a host name mismatch and we're not going to validate your connection. So this piece is really critical. It is outlined on my blog in terms of what we recommend around Horizon certificates. So just to kind of blow this up, because again, this is a very critical aspect to the deployment. What you typically want here is you're going to have an external pod load balancer, and in that externally facing load balancer, you're only going to have the VIP FQDN. You're not going to have any of the subject alternative names of the internal CSs. And this is usually for a security reason, right? So if anyone hits that external load balancer and they can see their certificate and they can read it, customers typically don't want the internal SAN names to be exposed because they don't want them to know what the internal servers are, which makes perfect sense. So in the external load balancer, you can definitely keep that. But internally, so on your connection servers down here, this is where you're going to have a different cert that's going to be more of an internal cert. And that internal cert is going to have the CN of the external VIP, and it's going to have the SAN FQDN of all the connection servers. So ideally what you have is on CS1, you're going to have an external, the CN of the external VIP. You're going to have all the subject alternative names of every single other CS in the same pod. And that same cert is going to be deployed on all of your internal CSs. And again, there's a reason why we're doing it this way, because when I accept the certificate for the first cert, or sorry, for the first connection server, I don't want to have a different or unique cert on connection servers 2 through 7, because otherwise you're going to have to tell VROPS to trust every single one, and that's not ideal. So have a single cert on every single connection server within the environment, have it have the external VIP common name and the subject alternative names of every single CS, and that should function perfectly. Now, you can also use wildcard certs, because that's definitely a lot easier if you want to internally, but just make sure it's the same cert internally and that they're actually valid. Because if they're not valid and you go to validate communication, this is where you're going to run into a problem. So again, those are best practices. If you have challenges with that architecture, feel free to reach out to your support team and we can talk through some of these other challenges that you might be having and why you may or may not can do that. But that's the upfront recommendation. All right, so at this point, because I provided a connection server, I provided authentication, I've given it a proxy to connect to, I've validated my connection, I accepted the cert, I should be good to go. Now, as I mentioned, if I had unique certs on all of my connection servers, I only accepted the one cert from this server. I didn't accept the certs from BCM 1 through 7. So if I went to enable load balancing here and set this to true, and I didn't accept the other certs, then this option is not going to work for you, because basically VROPS is going to try to talk to the first one, which it did get approval to talk to, and then the remaining ones won't work because, again, you didn't trust all those individual certs. So again, that's why we're going back to the recommendation of single cert on all the connected servers, make sure it's valid. And then the next step is to really review the overall configuration. So a couple of other questions you might have will be, okay, well, are you using both VDI and RDS farms? If you're only doing VDI, you do not need to enable collections on objects you don't have in your architecture. So if you're not doing RDS application pools or RDS farms, leave the application metric collection to false because it's referring to RDS apps here. And also leave the enable historical performance metric collection for RDS set to false. If you are using RDS, of course, set those to true. But again, just make sure, I guess the point is make sure you're only checking the flags that you need, because again, we provide these here to really optimize the collection into Horizon. So we're only asking questions that exist or that we know exist. And we're just, again, optimizing the performance of our API request. So in this environment, we have both. So I'm going to set this to true. I'm going to leave the load balancing option set to true, because again, we do have two connection servers and I've accepted both certificates. In terms of performance statistics collection, again, you'll want to set this to true. There's very few use cases where you wouldn't need to turn this on. But again, it just becomes a requirement if you're using certain aspects of the data that we're pulling in. But basically, I turned this on because this allows you to basically monitor the adapter performance, and I'll show you how to do that after we get through this screen. Login metrics. So login metrics, again, they should be only turned on if you really need them. Otherwise, it can take longer collection times to pull data. In smaller environments where, let's say you don't have 10,000 sessions on a pod, you probably can get away with login metric collections and it not add performance overhead. But just keep in mind that it does, because certain metrics like login collection times requires us to talk to various resources throughout Horizon. So one of the things in consideration here, and there's a KB article on how to enable login metrics in Horizon, but you need multiple components to make it work. For one, you have to use the Horizon Events database. If you're not using the Horizon Events database, you're not going to get login metrics to work, so you might as well not turn this on. The other area that has to be enabled is in every single connection server in the pod, you have to set the flag. There's a command that you run to basically says, hey, enable login timing, or enabling the login timing profiler service, right? So that basically tells Horizon you want to collect Horizon metrics and capture those in the events database. The third component is in the desktop agent itself. So when you install the Horizon agent, there's a service called the Login Monitor service. That has to both be installed and it has to be running. So you need all three of those things to pull it off. So that's events database, run the command on each connection server within the pod and tell it to enable login statistics, as well as making sure the Login Monitor service in the desktop's images are configured to run. Then you can turn this option on. So again, that's why it's set to default. Sorry, that's why it's defaulted to false out of the box. But just know that there are requirements to get login metrics to collecting beyond just setting this to true. Now beyond that, you will want to enable protocol performance metrics collection. Again, it's defaulted to false, and that's just because when we collect protocol data, it takes longer collection times. And if you have, let's say, a pod with a really high number of sessions, but a really low number of connection servers, this adds additional overhead and it can take longer for the API queries to happen. So by default, we recommend setting this to false. Check your collection times, which I'll show you how to do in just a moment. And as long as those are good, you can then enable the protocol performance and again, reevaluate the collection times and making sure that they're staying in an appropriate time window. Okay, so I'm going to set these to true in this environment, so because I know we're good in terms of architecture and session sizes. And then of course, we're doing RDS farm, so we definitely want to collect historical performance metrics on our farms. Now, the other options around connection server URLs, I don't really recommend using this option. This option is really meant to be a workaround if your certificates on your connection servers are not valid. So if your connection server certificates are valid, you're basically done at this point. You don't need to turn on any more options. However, if the connection server certificates are invalid, this provides you basically a workaround to basically trick VROPs into accepting the cert. But it's a little complicated because the first part is you whitelist the URLs that you want VROPs to accept, but the really annoying part is you also have to update the host file or DNS entries on the proxies and the VROPs cluster to now map to those URLs, right? Because again, if on your connection server you have the name of, let's say you have an external domain name of a connection server, but your internal name is different, and you want VROPs to think, well, no, use this name and map it to this IP, you're basically telling VROPs when it connects to this internal domain name that it resolves to an IP that it knows, right? Because if it tries to talk to VCM2 and it gets some external domain name back in the certificate, it's going to be confused and you'll never pass validation. So that's why I say this is a great workaround and all, but the reality is you want valid certs on your connection servers, and that simplifies the entire process. So hopefully I've stated that enough. All right, at this point I'm going to hit cancel because we already have the Horizon adapter installed. And as I mentioned, I don't want multiple adapters talking to the same pod, asking the same question over and over and over, because that means I have two adapters competing for questions against my pod, and that's not ideal. I'm going to hit cancel, discard my changes. You would hit save here, and at that point you should be up and running as long as everything validated and you're properly connected. Now, once that happens, I'm going to show you how you can validate that you're collecting and how to validate that the data is coming in a good manner. So the first thing you'll want to do is hopefully you'll see the status okay, but this takes time. If you just hit the okay and it wasn't running, expect that to take about 5 minutes or so to go green. Don't expect that to instantaneously go green. However, to validate, you can go to object details of the adapter and you can go to metrics. So once the metrics start to populate, the first thing you'll notice is we have a last collection time. So that is the date timestamp of the last time we were able to communicate and get data from the adapter. So that's a critical piece. If you don't see any data here, or that was some time 3 days ago, that means it's no longer collecting. Another thing that I mentioned is looking at overall performance of the collection. This is the collection duration in seconds. So how long does it take for our adapter to get all the data on all the sessions based on the checkboxes that you checked within the collection interval? And in this case, again, we're going for a time sub 5 minutes. So as long as we're under the 5 minute threshold in terms of seconds, we're good. And in this environment, you can see that we kind of consistently stay well below 200, and we don't have any exceedingly long collection times. However, if you notice that your performance is bad, there could be numerous reasons for this. It could be that you're not doing load balancing properly and that the API can't spread out its request to the various available connection servers. Or maybe you don't have enough connection servers based on the number of connected sessions in the pod. So really our scalability is around how many requests can we make to the Horizon API in a certain amount of time based on the number of connection servers. So the more connection servers available, the more questions or sessions we can support in a given pod up to certain given thresholds. Now, today, we're looking at ways to improve, the API throughput, but again, my recommendations are in the blog. I recommend going through that for additional details. So at this point, you should have a mostly collecting environment. Again, this will help you validate that the performance times are in acceptable limits. The next step I recommend to get started during your deployment is to review the Horizon World dashboards. So the Horizon World dashboards are designed and meant to kind of give you a good understanding of overall information coming out of the Horizon environment, but it's also a good way to just check that you're not missing any data. So typically I'll go through the Horizon World overview dashboard first. I'll then look at some of the session dashboards, the connection server objects, but really the Horizon World overview dashboard should give you a pretty good sense for, are we collecting data? Now, one other key aspect of the deployment beyond just deploying the adapter is if you want to do specific Horizon service monitoring, this requires an additional step of installing the Telegraf agent into both the UAG and connection server. So when you first deploy the adapter, what you'll notice is these two boxes, and actually let me see if I can move this over. These two boxes where it says the health check of the UAG and the HTTP health check of the connection server, these will be blank. And it'll be blank because the Telegraf agent hasn't been deployed and configured yet to provide this metric. So really, these are the only two metrics that require the Telegraf agent. If you're fine without these services, you can kind of stop here and move on. But basically, this is where we are using the Telegraf agent to query the Horizon service, making sure it's coming back in a good status, which is 200. And as long as it comes back with 200, we know that the Horizon service is up and running and functioning. Now, Telegraf can do a lot more than just that, but again, in terms of this particular demo, I want to keep it rather short and to the point. So the next step that you'll need to do to get Telegraf deployed is you'll want to come under Environment, Applications, Manage Telegraf Agents, and this is where you need to find the actual VMs of the connection server and UAGs. So in this case, let's see. That's not exactly what I wanted. I'm just going to show all of them, so I'm not. Agent status. Actually, I'll just leave it at that. So basically, you search for your particular VMs. So it's actually installed on the VM object, and you're going to come to the VM object and you're going to say install. Now, for the connection servers, you're going to deploy it with a common username and password. Because they are Windows, this is where you're going to basically provide it with a Windows level credential like this and a password that has the ability to install an application on a server. So this doesn't have to be a service account per se. It basically just needs to be, it can be your permissions as long as your Active Directory permissions allow you to install an application on a server. So at this point, I would click OK, I would click Next. We're not installing on Linux on this one, and we're basically going to be pushing it to this particular server. If you had a list of connection servers, you can list them all at once and deploy it all at once. And you'll click the Install Agent option, and that'll push you to it. Now, it's already installed, so I'm not going to do that again. It was just going to fail. But once it is installed and you see agent status is running, this is where you're going to come in and configure the HTTP checks. Now, there's additional checks you can do because Telegraf is a very flexible agent. But just to get you up and running and collecting all the metrics on the Horizon World dashboard, this is the only one you need to really implement. So here you'll click Add. You'll say, I'm going to add a new HTTP check. You're going to give it a display name. I'm just going to call it HTTP check. And for the URL, you really can just use localhost. I mean, if you know each connection server's URL, that's great and all, but localhost will work because the agent is running on itself. So you use this format, and then your method's going to be get. So we're going to do a get query against this particular URL. And I would say recommend setting the skip host chain verification to true. this just simplifies the overall installation and configuration. Again, you're an agent running on the server talking to yourself. You don't really need to check yourself for host chain verification. So click Save, and once you do that, then you'll have a new HTTP service. And once it starts collecting data, that's where we'll be able to monitor this information directly on the Horizon object. So again, going back, actually, let me go back to UAGs. So UAGs, or do I have this in here? Where are they? There we go. So UAGs are a little bit different only because it's a Linux install versus Windows. So you'll go to the UAG object, you'll click install, still choose the common username and password, but this is where you'll give it the root account that gives you access to log into the console of the UAG. That particular username and password is based on whatever you set up when you deploy the UAG, so you will need to know that information to get started. But basically, you provide that information, you'll click Next, leave this option checked because we are doing Linux. One other note I can tell you about the UAGs, because they are UAGs and kind of locked down, there's usually an additional command that you need to run. Basically, it's a remount command on the temp folder of the actual console of the UAG. And the reason for that is when you go to install it, basically what's going to happen is we're going to try to push the installer to the temp folder on the UAG, and then we're going to try to extract the installation and run it from there. And the temp folder doesn't have the execute permissions on it enabled, and it's just going to break your install. So what I'll do is I'll provide a link to that particular how-to, what the command is specifically, in the notes of this demo video. And then that way you can refer to it to when you deploy your UAGs, run that command first, come here, do the install, and it should function properly. But in terms of the HTTP checks, again, that's exactly the same. So you'll click add, and I'll just kind of show you. It's still an HTTP check. I'm still doing localhost, I'm still doing git, and I'm skipping host chain verification. Now, once I've done that, I should have a fully functioning environment. There really shouldn't be any data points that you're not collecting. So in terms of just validating metrics, making sure, and again, give it time, to get full data all the way to the Horizon World level, because we have a very user-centric data model, it's going to take time. We need users connected into the environment. They have to have a session. We have to be collecting performance data coming from their VM to get the data center KPIs, and we need protocol data coming in to get their network KPIs. So if you're not collecting protocol data, you're not going to have a network performance score. And if we don't have users connecting in to a VM, we're not going to have data center scores. So keep in mind, we actually do need users connecting in to the environment to get solid data into the management pack. But from there, you should now have a historical view of all your data center performance across your entire Horizon world, which means across all your Horizon pods. So this is a running score that's historical for all your users. As far back as that you have data, hey, did we ever have performance problems in the past, and were they data center related? Did users ever have protocol performance in the past? And this is an overall average score of everyone in your environment. So it's very powerful from that perspective. You'll then have access to overall UAG performance, how the UAGs are performing. Are the users having issues connected to the UAG? You'll have an overall, and just like for a user, you have an overall score. You'll have a protocol score of the users coming through the UAG, as well as a VM score. And then you'll see, now that we have Telegraf configured, we get the health check validation, and we know the services are running. So again, great way to just quickly validate that data is collecting. Use this dashboard, but give it time. Don't expect it to instantaneously have everything populated, but within, I don't know, let's say 30 minutes or so of good user data coming in, we should start to see these things build out. But again, this just becomes a good validation point for making sure that the options you have enabled, like here we have, let's see, here are some of our pool level statistics on capacity. Here's our overall statistics on, what's our worst performing RDS farms. Here you can see we have login time metrics enabled. So every checkbox you have turned on, expect data, if a checkbox is turned off, like login times, don't expect data. So anyway, I'll wrap this particular demo up, but thank you for taking the time to listen to today's demo. Let me know if you have any particular questions. Feel free to reach out to your VMware sales counterpart if you have trouble getting in touch with me, but happy to answer any questions as I can. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.